Chairman, apologies from Councillor Dempster today, and from the Pensions Board we have apologies from George Hurst and Helen Pedley.
I think everybody here knows each other. I think it was the other two who've actually sent their apologies. It might be strangers to some members of the committee, so I don't think we need any introductions. Any declarations of interest? No. Minutes of the meeting of 26th February. Happy with those? Okay. I can just say this is the first joint meeting of the Pensions Subcommittee and the Pensions Board. I think those of us who were at the seminar up in Glasgow on Tuesday will be fully conversant with what this new setup means. Having said that, was the third seminar that I've been at in the last 2 years with these new regulations, and speaking to colleagues that I've known for a number of years who've served in the pension subcommittee for a number of years, we're still none the wiser as to what this means. I think it's just a convoluted piece of legislation that can be tackled a lot easier in order to address a specific problem. But there we are, we have what we have, and we'd better move on with it. Item 4 is Local Government Pension Scheme Administration Annual Update, report by Head of Organisational Development and Human Resources. Okay.
Nothing to add, Chair. Happy to give a brief overview of the document, otherwise happy to take questions.
Members get any questions on the report? Ian?
No questions, but I would accept the brief overview if that was an option.
Okay, sure.
Thanks, Chair. The report provides the committee with the administration and policy discretions for the new scheme coming into force on the 1st of April. It's been a very busy year within the team. It's already been touched upon about the new regulations, and in fact pensions is no longer the service people only use at retirement. We've got considerable demand from our customers in terms of how they plan their future retirement, which is a good thing. And they're taking an interest driven more by publicity and change at a national level, but also a realisation that people have to plan more effectively for their retirement. That does have an impact on our team, and we're responding to those additional demands. A lot has changed in the last 12 months. We have a new pensions administration system which is helping us get through the new requirements of the new scheme. We're also building the knowledge within the teams. There's a lot more complexity around the new regulations for the administration team, and we've attended a number of training sessions nationally with colleagues from other pension authorities in Scotland to help share that knowledge and understanding to ensure that we have a consistent approach across Scotland. A lot of the process and procedures that we had in place have had to be amended and changed and updated, and that's a big job given the nature of the work that we do, and also in terms of the ageing population of the workforce. More people are retiring, but equally we're seeing an increase in the membership of the scheme, which is good for the lifeblood of the fund. Appendix 1 of the report shows once again the financial information and the retirement information for the year 2014 and 15. And we are seeing that increase across the board. We have got a good record of engagement with our members across the fund, and we've got a high percentage of staff in the workforce that are members of the scheme, and that continues to increase, and that's good news. The team also continues to support the Early Retirement Voluntary Redundancy Scheme, and the changes made to the scheme in July 2014 at Policy and Resources Committee to enhance some of the compensatory arrangements continues to attract employees to the scheme. The team carried out nearly 500 early retirement calculations in the last 12 months, and that's resulted in 55 redundancy retirements through that period of time. In terms of Appendix 2, we have policy discretions which are listed in quite some detail, which is a requirement under the new pension regulations that as an administering authority we must agree and hold on record the discretions that go through in Appendix 2. I don't intend to go through them line by line, but I'm happy to take any questions from members.
Thanks, Chair. It's 3.16, and I noticed you mentioned that it's going to be pretty labour intensive and costly to deal with the consequences of the GMP and the removal of the contracted out pension. How much is that going to cost? How many employees do we need, or have you got? And how long will they be there for? I take it I noticed it's April 2018, so presumably you're going to have to be around for longer than that. So can you tell us what the budgetary implications are and how many staff are involved?
We've put forward a proposal to senior management to look at increasing the resources within the team generally, because we're looking at a substantial increase in demand across a number of projects within the team. What we've looked at and we've planned for is 3 full-time equivalent extra members of staff, which will not only deal with this GMP project, but will also look at the other areas that we need to build resource within our team to cope with the new regulatory change. We've costed that to be between 80 and 90,000 pounds in terms of a budgetary cost to the scheme. The proposal is with my senior management at the moment, and we're currently looking at discussing how we make that happen to ensure that we've got that sustainable resource to make sure we meet not only that GMP project, but the other projects that are required on a sustained ongoing basis within the new scheme.
Is that 80 or 90,000 per annum revenue costs, and do we get any relief from central government or anywhere else for the implementation of this, considering it's a national policy?
It would be an annual cost, because the administration would specifically be dealt with as improving the performance of the fund. Then it would be chargeable to the fund. However, we are not getting any additional resources from government in relation to dealing with these workload issues that we find ourselves in.
I think it's important to recognise that, as well as that additional annual cost, that's the annual cost in terms of additional internal resources. By far and away, the bigger cost to the council is the fact that the end of the contracting out will mean that we'll actually be paying greater annual national insurance contributions to all our employees going forward. That will cost us several £1 million extra. The Scottish Government is currently in negotiations in terms of whether there will be any additional funding will come to councils in recognition of that. The indications at the moment is that that will not be the case, and that is a significant additional cost pressure for all Scottish councils, and that is a major issue for councils going forward, and that's something we're looking at the minute. I've built in additional funding to our budget going forward in recognition of that, but that is one of the reasons why we've got a significant additional savings requirement from 16-17 onwards at the minute, and that's a major issue for all councils.
Thanks, Chair. I was just wondering, at 3.5 page, or we've got a page at the bottom, why there's so big fluctuations in the like of the payment of dependents' pension. You know, it seems to fluctuate from 94% down to 64%. I presume there's quite a, and some of the other ones seem to fluctuate year by year. I was just wondering the cause for that.
Yep, we've looked at the performance across the range of services that we provide, and because the workload has risen exponentially over a sustained period of time, we're seeing reductions in performance. In terms of the dependent side, it's a highly complex and sensitive area of business that we work in, so it requires that additional support as a resource to get through the work, and we're not getting through it as quickly as we can. We've got a plan in place to resolve that. And we're going to work through that with the aim to get the additional resource in place, that in 12 months' time we would see a turnaround in those performance indicators.
Sorry, if I could just get...
Sorry, go on. Thanks, Chairman. In regards to, well, I had two questions. One was the same as Ian's, but the only point I want further clarified in regards to that is I think you said the financial pressure for that is on the fund itself. It's not on the council. The extra £80,000 that's been applied for. See, now people have an option to actually cash in. Will that be a pressure, do you think, in the future? Cashing in, people can cashing in on their actual pension?
At the moment, the changes that are in the public domain about people from age 55 having entitlement to cash that in, that excludes public sector pension schemes at the moment, because the regulations would need to change in order to allow that to happen. However, I am aware that there is a steering group within England and Wales that are looking at whether or not this is something that could be applied to the scheme in England and Wales, and thereby that would normally mean that would be something that would come north of the border as well.
Thanks. Just two things. Just sort of come back to the point you made, Paul. But just on that last point, I'm right in saying that at present, if somebody wants to theoretically encash their pension pot, they would have to transfer it into a defined contribution or a private pension in order to do that. So the occupational scheme currently will not allow encashment. Could I come back on the other point afterwards, after that answer, please, Chair?
Certainly, Councillor, your assessment is absolutely correct. Transfer out would only be the only route available to existing staff into one of those schemes to allow them to cash that in.
And just on your own point, Paul, so basically what you're saying is that there are several millions of pressure being put on the council. So where does the funding come from? Can you be more specific about how much and where is this actually going to come from?
Basically, we have in our annual budget plan, this is a council issue rather than a pension fund issue. We have in our annual budget plan, as you'll be aware, we generally have an allowance for budget pressures of £3 million per annum. I've increased that allowance to £5 million in 2016-17 because of the end of the national insurance contracting out arrangements. Within that, there's an allowance of between £2.5 and £3 million for the end of the contracting out arrangements for national insurance, because that's the estimated impact of that on the council because of the increase in the national insurance rates for our employees.
And you're confident we can meet that?
Well, that's the estimated additional cost associated with this. Basically, it's between £2.5 million and £3 million is the estimated additional cost to the council of the end of national insurance contracting out arrangements from 1st of April 2016. 2.5 to 3. Yep.
Excuse me. Thanks, Chair. If there's a perceived increased cost running the pension scheme and we can't recover that, do you envisage any increase in the contributions?
No, this is a cost to the council rather than to the pension scheme.
Chair, the funding strategy statement you've got before you is the updated version, which has been produced in conjunction with Hymans Robertson. It's the actuarial side of Hymans, it's not the investment side, and basically outlines how they have carried out the last valuation, what the procedures are for the fund when it comes to setting employer rates. Obviously, there's bits and pieces where any of the employers wish to leave the fund for any reason, how we determine the cessation value, that is, how much they've got to pay to get out to cover their liabilities, etc. It's a fairly technical document, but it's one that's required by regulation. The document itself is published each year in the annual account. Annual report and accounts. It's available for public inspection. I'm happy to take any questions members have, whether I can answer them or not, without referring up to the actuarial colleagues in Glasgow. I'm not quite sure. This indicates there's been a change. Oh, thank you. This indicates there's been a change to the existing way things are calculated. Could you explain what the changes are?
The main change in the valuation was the funding of the deficit within the fund. Previously, the employer contribution rate was set with in two parts. There was the element to fund liabilities going forward, and then there was an adjustment to the overall contribution rate to take account of any surplus or deficit within the fund, and that was expressed as a percentage of payroll and built in, so your employer contribution rate was adjusted accordingly. What the actuaries have advised and what's been built in following the valuation report is that the deficit funding adjustment is determined as a monetary amount. The concern was that as a result of falling payrolls, the contributions that would come in as a percentage contribution of the payrolls would not be sufficient to cover the deficit. So instead of that, we've said that an annual monetary payment is made by all employers towards the deficit funding. So that's been built into the thing this year. There are basically the statement itself covers. It's been updated. There's a bit more detail in it than there was in the past. But that if you're looking for information on how the actual valuation was carried out, the technical stuff I can't really say on
No,
that.
it's not from the technical point of view. It's just more from the actual cash value point of view. What's the difference in terms of the contributions that we made?
The impact on the council itself are negligible. We looked at how the cash amount impacted on the overall contribution from the council, and it turns out to say it's within thousands of pounds. It's not a great deal. Other employers have seen a substantial increase in the charges, and it tends to be those who are reducing payrolls. The main examples I can give, and it shows in the actuarial valuation which has been produced, the two that have been hit the hardest are the police and fire. Their civilian staff are members of the scheme, but in the light of the change to the single forces, the number of members who are still in the Dumfries and Galloway scheme has reduced substantially. The liabilities are still there, so the employer is now required to pick up the cost of that. So they have seen a fairly substantial increase in their contribution.
Andy, what does the council do in terms of risk profiling? I mean, if you look at maybe a scale of 1 to 10 or 1 to 5 or something like that, is there a set risk profile where a certain percentage would be put on sort of cautious funds, so many in perhaps higher risk? How exactly do we define the sort of the risk of investments in the fund? Is it always the same, or do we alter it? And who decides that?
The actual investment strategy itself is, we take advice from, this is where Alison's side come in, when we look at we tend to review the investment strategy after the valuation, and that's when the risk of investment is considered. We change the balance of the investments, move from equities to bonds or such like, try and maximise the return with a minimum risk. If you can,
Yeah, if I could add to that, whenever we're looking at the most appropriate strategy for the fund, i.e. the optimal mix between equities, bonds, property and other, the whole picture is looked at. So the liability level is looked at. We model the expected return from the different asset classes, so the expected return that you would get from equities, the expected return from bonds, and those asset classes have an associated risk or a volatility with them. So there is an actuarial model which plugs all those numbers in and looks at the assets, which is what we will come on to, and returns from the different asset classes. And the actuarial side also look at the liabilities and the valuation of the liabilities, and looking forward, what is expected to be paid out. And what is arrived at is the optimal asset liability mix. And that is reviewed, as Andrew said, usually after the valuation. And at the last valuation, we looked at what you have in equities and bonds, property, etc., relative to what your funding statement is. And it was deemed that the expected return, we couldn't really take any more risk off the table. And by that, I mean reducing equities, because equities is your higher risk investment. We still needed that level of expected return, which is higher, to try and meet the gap. Is that helpful? Thank you.
Excuse me. One of the things we heard at the training we did earlier in the week was that in England and Wales has been a very low take-up of one of the new scheme options, which is a 50-50 option. Is that low take-up likely to have any effect on the calculations that have been done regarding the future liabilities?
There was an element built into the valuation for 50-50. I can't recall off the top of my head what it actually was, but as you say, I think the actual take-up of it is a lot less than what was anticipated or what was built into the valuation. Whether it will have a substantial impact on contribution rates going forward, I couldn't really say. Obviously, 50-50, the employer is still still required to pay. It's still required to pay the full amount. It's the employee who pays 50% of the contribution in return for 50% of the benefit.
Thank you. It's just a question on the governance risks on page 25 of the report, and it was just really to try and get a better sense of how the new pensions board fits into that, perhaps into the summary of control mechanisms for some of the risks, where it maybe refers to the administering authority maintaining close contact with specialist advisors, and it's just really, it does mention there that advice is delivered via formal meetings involving elected members and recorded, etc. And I'm really just trying to get a sense of where the new board position would be in terms of having a governance role, or would that not be appropriate for this particular document?
The remit of the pensions board is basically to work alongside. I mean, what we expect it to be is to work alongside the pensions committee to ensure that the pensions committee takes decisions in accordance with regulation. So they're acting more or less as a scrutiny committee. So on that side of things, there is involvement in what they take part in debate, etc., and ensure that the committee more or less do what they're supposed to do. It's not a case of we don't want this or we don't want that, unless there's any regulation backing them up. It's more a case of the decisions are taken with the concern with full information, etc., as has always been the case. It's say the board are acting as a scrutiny panel in that instance.
So it's more of a scrutiny rather than a governance role.